The courtroom was deadly silent. The tension hung thick in the air, like an unseen force squeezing every inch of life from the room. The gavel slammed down with a deafening crack, echoing through the space as the judge's voice rang out. "The truth will come to light." His words seemed to hang in the air, ominous, unyielding. The defendant, pale and trembling, stood frozen. They had just confessed to a crime so unimaginable, the room collectively held its breath, unsure of what to do next. But it wasn't just the confession. It was what came after. From the back of the courtroom, a figure rose. Eyes wide with terror, they stumbled forward, blurting out a secret that could ruin everything. "I know who did it," they gasped. All eyes shifted to them. What followed would change everything. A revelation so devastating it threatened to undo all that had been built. Betrayal was in the air, and justice was no longer a guarantee. The clock was ticking, and with every second, the stakes grew higher. This wasn't just a trial. It was a battle for truth, one that would leave scars far deeper than any verdict could erase. The tension in the courtroom escalated. The woman's words still hung in the air, and the entire room was charged with the weight of her confession. No one spoke for a long moment, their breaths shallow, their minds racing. The judge, a man hardened by years of practice, cleared his throat and addressed the room. "This court will hear the truth," he said, his voice cold but authoritative. The silence that followed was heavy, as if the walls themselves were waiting for the next words to be spoken. The woman had stumbled into a trap she could barely comprehend. The truth she revealed was far more dangerous than any of them had anticipated. The case had just taken a dark turn. The witnesses, once confident in their statements, were now questioning their roles in the unfolding drama. The prosecutor's face twisted in disbelief. It was clear that things were spiraling out of control. What had been a simple case of a guilty defendant was now a tangled web of lies, secrets, and unimaginable consequences. The prosecutor stood frozen, her pen suspended mid-note. Her carefully built case was crumbling before her eyes. She glanced at the jury, their faces reflecting a mixture of confusion and unease. The woman's claim had cut through the air like a blade, slicing the trial's momentum in half. The defense attorney leaned forward, sensing an opportunity to strike. "Ow. Your Honor, this changes everything," he said, his voice calm but edged with urgency. The judge's gaze swept across the room, his mind calculating the weight of every word spoken. He was no stranger to shocks, but this was different. It wasn't just a case anymore. It was a battlefield of truths and lies, each fighting for dominance. Outside, the night pressed against the tall windows, the rain beginning to fall. Inside, the tension was so thick, it seemed to muffle the sound of the storm. The air carried the metallic scent of dread. Somewhere deep down, everyone in that room knew. The real trial was only just beginning. The jury foreman shifted uncomfortably, tapping his fingers against the polished wood of the rail. He didn't want to be here anymore. No one did. The room felt smaller, with every second that passed, the walls inching closer. The woman at the back took another shaky breath, her voice gaining a fraction of strength. "You're all wrong," she said. Gasps rippled through the gallery, but no one dared speak over her. The defendant's eyes darted to the judge, searching for help, but none came. The storm outside grew louder, wind rattling the old windows as if nature itself wanted in. The court clerk scribbled frantically, her pen scratching against paper like the ticking of a clock counting down to disaster. Somewhere in the room, a chair creaked. Every sound felt amplified in the heavy air. What was once a controlled process had turned into a spiral, and every person present could feel it dragging them down. The judge finally lowered the gavel, but it didn't strike the desk. Instead, it hovered just above the wood as he said, "We will recess." His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the calculation racing through his mind. The bailiff stepped forward, ready to clear the room, but the woman's voice cut through the movement. "If we stop now, the truth will disappear," she pleaded. Her words froze everyone in place. Even the storm outside seemed to pause. The judge straightened, his jaw tight. "Then speak," he ordered. Every head turned toward her again. She swallowed hard, knowing that what she was about to say could end more than just the trial. It could end lives. The clock above the door ticked once, loud and deliberate. The moment felt suspended, as if time itself was holding its breath. And then, she began. The courtroom reopened under a heavier sky, the storm outside pounding harder against the windows. The woman's revelation had shifted the ground beneath everyone's feet. The prosecutor's voice was sharper now, fueled by urgency. "We demand she testify under oath," she declared. The defense attorney objected instantly, his tone edged with cold precision. "Her statement is unverified and dangerously prejudicial." The judge leaned back, weighing each word. His eyes moved from one lawyer to the other, as if gauging who would blink first. The gallery buzzed with hushed whispers, the air thick with anticipation. The woman herself sat rigid, her hands clasped so tightly, her knuckles were white. Outside, thunder rolled like a warning. This was no longer a matter of legal strategy, it was survival. The woman's eyes darted nervously as the bailiff approached with the oath card. "Do you swear to tell the truth?" His voice was low, but in the charged silence, it sounded like a thunderclap. She swallowed hard. "I do." The judge gestured for her to proceed. The first words came slowly, like stones rolling downhill. "The defendant wasn't there that night, but I know who was." Gasps erupted across the gallery, some covering their mouths. The prosecutor leaned in, her pen ready, her heartbeat quickening. The defense attorney's jaw tightened. The storm outside answered with another crash of thunder, rattling the glass as if demanding to be heard. The prosecutor's voice took on a surgical precision. "Name them." The woman hesitated, her breath uneven. The judge's eyes narrowed, ready to intervene if necessary. Finally, she whispered a name, so faint the court reporter paused mid-typing to confirm. The name sent ripples through the room. It belonged to a respected public figure. Murmurs rose in waves as the defense attorney shot to his feet. "Objection!" he roared, the force in his voice breaking the tension into chaos. The judge's gavel struck hard, but the noise in the room was already uncontainable. Somewhere in the gallery, a man slipped quietly out of his seat, disappearing through the rear exit. Security moved toward the rear doors, but the man was already gone. The bailiff muttered into his radio, his pace urgent but controlled. The judge turned back to the witness, his tone now cutting. "Do you understand the gravity of your accusation?" She nodded, though her voice was lost under the growing hum of tension. The prosecutor leaned on the podium, pressing further. "Where were you when this happened?" The woman's answer was hesitant, her words trembling. She had been somewhere she shouldn't have been, with someone she shouldn't have met. The admission only deepened the fracture in the case. The storm outside had become a relentless drumbeat, pounding in sync with the chaos inside. The prosecutor requested a recess to secure the witness for protection. The defense, however, pushed to dismiss her testimony entirely, claiming fabrication. The judge, clearly caught between competing fires, called both attorneys to the bench. Their hushed voices carried enough venom to taint the air. In the gallery, spectators exchanged theories in hurried whispers. The woman sat motionless, staring at her clasped hands, as if trying to disappear into herself. Somewhere beyond those walls, the man in the trench coat was already setting the next move into motion. The man in the trench coat slipped into the rain-slicked alley behind the courthouse, his footsteps echoing off the narrow brick walls. Inside, the witness sat trembling under the judge's watchful eye. "Miss Avery," the prosecutor said carefully, "we must know everything." Avery's gaze flickered toward the empty corner where the shadowy figure had been moments before. She hesitated, as though speaking his name would summon him. The defense attorney tapped his pen, impatient. "This is becoming a witch hunt," he snapped. The judge's voice cut through the tension. "Proceed." Avery drew a slow breath, her words tasting like ash. "He was there that night, and he's watching me now." The prosecutor leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Are you saying you've been followed?" Avery's hands tightened around the edge of the witness stand. "For weeks," she whispered. Murmurs swelled through the gallery. The judge raised a hand for silence, but the tension was alive now, feeding on every look and word. Outside, the storm had begun to ease, the patter of rain slowing, but the air inside felt heavier than ever. The defense attorney's jaw twitched. His client's fate was being buried under shadowy accusations. The court reporter's fingers stumbled on the keys, glancing up at Avery as if the weight of her confession was too much to type. A bailiff entered quietly from the side door, leaning toward the judge and whispering something urgent. The judge's brow furrowed, his eyes momentarily flicking toward the rear of the courtroom. "We will take a brief recess," he announced, but his voice carried an undertone of unease. Avery's heart pounded. She knew they'd found something, or someone. The prosecutor gathered her files with quick, practiced motions, already heading for the side corridor. The defense attorney whispered harshly into his client's ear, the words lost under the shuffle of feet and rustle of coats. Outside the tall windows, a single police cruiser's lights pulsed against the wet pavement. In the dimly lit corridor outside, the prosecutor found two detectives waiting. One of them, a tall man with salt and pepper hair, handed her a folded piece of paper. "It was left under the witness car," he said. She opened it to find a single sentence written in bold black ink. "She won't make it to the verdict." Her stomach turned cold. "Increase her protection," she ordered. Back inside, Avery sat alone at the witness stand, the murmurs of the gallery creeping back in. She had no idea that her testimony had just drawn a line in the sand, and the other side was already moving. When the court reconvened, the judge's voice was heavier. "Miss Avery, are you prepared to continue?" Her eyes met his, and for a fleeting second, she considered saying no. But then she straightened, her voice firmer than before. "Yes, Your Honor." The prosecutor's questions came sharper now, digging for every detail. Avery spoke with measured precision, knowing each word could be her shield or her undoing. In the gallery, an empty seat sat where the trench-coated man had been. The absence was louder than his presence, like a phantom lingering just out of sight. The courthouse security was doubled overnight. Metal detectors beeped louder, footsteps echoed sharper. Inside, Avery sat in the witness stand again, her voice steady but her eyes scanning every shadow. The prosecutor's questions cut with precision, but every answer pulled the room further into dangerous territory. "Were you aware of his connections?" she asked. Avery hesitated, her jaw tightening. "More than I wanted to be." The defense attorney shifted in his chair, pen tapping nervously. In the gallery, unfamiliar faces watched without blinking, as if waiting for a signal. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the air unnervingly still, a calm that felt like a loaded gun. The prosecutor slid a photograph across to Avery. It was grainy, taken at night, the trench-coated man speaking with another figure under a street lamp. Avery's fingers twitched as she reached for it. "This is who I saw," she confirmed. The defense attorney rose instantly. "Unsubstantiated. No chain of custody. Irrelevant." His words rattled fast, like a man cornered. The judge's gavel came down, restoring order. But the photo had already burned itself into the minds of the jury. It was no longer just testimony. It was a visual threat, proof that shadows had names and faces. During a recess, Avery was escorted into the witness room. The blinds were half closed, sunlight cutting in slanted lines. She paced, hands gripping her elbows. The prosecutor entered, shutting the door softly. "You're not safe here," she said plainly. Avery met her eyes, reading the truth there. "Then why keep me?" The prosecutor's voice softened. "Because without you, the case dies. And so does any chance of stopping him." Outside the door, a shadow lingered in the hall. Someone was listening. Back in the courtroom, the defense shifted strategies. "Miss Avery," he said smoothly, "isn't it true you have a history with the accused?" Gasps rippled. Avery's lips pressed into a thin line. "A history of fear," she replied. The room stilled, but the damage was done, Doubt had been planted. The defense leaned back, satisfied. The prosecutor scribbled furiously, already preparing to counter. The judge's gaze moved between them like a pendulum, measuring each blow. The gallery was silent now, waiting for the next fracture to form. The day ended in shadows. Avery was escorted through a side exit under heavy guard. The alley smelled of rain and oil, the pavement glistening under weak sodium lights. A black sedan waited with engine idling. She hesitated before stepping in, her eyes scanning the darkness beyond the fence. A flicker of movement caught her attention, a tall shape at the far end of the alley, watching. The guards urged her forward. The door shut, and the sedan pulled away, taillights fading into the night. Behind them the figure melted into the shadows. Morning light spilled into the courtroom, but it brought no warmth. Avery took the stand again, her eyes distant. The prosecutor's tone was softer now. "You understand the risk?" Avery nodded. "I've lived with it for months." In the gallery, a familiar face appeared, someone she once trusted. He smiled faintly, and her breath caught. The defense attorney noticed, and leaned toward his client with a whisper. The tension shifted, like a silent signal had been exchanged. The judge cleared his throat, pulling focus back to the testimony, but Avery's mind was already racing. Trust, once broken, was a weapon, and she had just seen it sharpened in real time. The prosecutor held up a second photograph, this one in full color, clear as day. "Do you recognize this?" Avery's pulse quickened. It was the same man from the gallery, caught mid-handshake with the trench-coated figure. "Yes," she said, voice low. The gallery erupted. The defense attorney slammed his palm on the desk. "Objection! This is a setup." The judge's gavel struck hard, but order was slow to return. Avery knew the room had changed. This wasn't about the defendant anymore. It was about the network behind him, and the man smiling in the back knew she had just painted a target on herself. During the recess, Avery stepped into the witness corridor, escorted by 2 guards. The man from the gallery was there, leaning casually against the wall. "You're brave," he said softly, almost admiringly. The guards stiffened, but he raised his hands in mock surrender. "I'm just here to watch." Avery's chest tightened, his eyes told her he was here for far more than that. The prosecutor appeared from around the corner, her face darkening when she saw him. "Back inside," she ordered the guards. The man's smirk lingered in Avery's mind long after the door shut behind her. Back in court, the defense called an unexpected witness, a former colleague of Avery's. The man took the stand with a calm, confident air. "She's lying," he said, eyes locked on her. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Avery's throat tightened. The prosecutor objected, but the judge allowed the testimony to proceed. The man spoke in careful, deliberate sentences, crafting doubt like an artist with a fine brush. Each word was a twist of the knife. Avery realized the betrayal was deeper than she imagined. This wasn't just about silencing her. It was about rewriting the truth itself. The prosecutor's redirect was swift and sharp, dismantling parts of the man's story. But the damage was done. Doubt had taken root. The jury's faces were harder to read now, their eyes darting between Avery and the defense's new witness. In the gallery, the man in the gray suit leaned back, satisfied. The judge called for the day's adjournment, but the air remained heavy. As Avery left under guard, she caught one last glance from the man, a silent promise that this was far from over. Outside, the sky had turned a bruised purple, the first hints of night closing in. The courthouse felt different that morning, not just tense, but dangerous. Security checkpoints were tighter, and the air buzzed with unspoken warnings. Avery arrived flanked by 2 officers, her eyes scanning every corner. Inside, the judge's expression was hard, as though he'd been briefed on threats no one else could hear. The prosecutor shuffled papers with mechanical precision, her jaw locked. "We're going to finish this," she murmured to herself. Across the aisle, the defense attorney whispered to his client, their heads nearly touching. Every movement felt loaded, every glance a message. Today, there would be no safe middle ground, only winners and casualties. The prosecutor's first move was unexpected. She presented a sealed envelope to the judge. He broke the wax seal, scanning its contents with growing intensity. "This changes the scope of our proceedings," he announced. The defense attorney's eyes narrowed. "We request immediate review." The prosecutor shook her head. "Too late, this is admissible and relevant." Murmurs erupted in the gallery. Avery sat straighter, sensing the shift. In the far corner, the man in the gray suit leaned forward, his interest sharpened like a blade. The air seemed to contract, pulling everyone toward the gravity of what had just been revealed. Inside the envelope was a series of intercepted communications, proof of coordination between the defendant and the trench-coated man. The judge's gavel slammed. "This court will hear these in full." The defense attorney's protest was drowned out by the recording's first crackle. Voices emerged, muffled but clear enough to convict. Avery's stomach turned as she recognized one of them. It wasn't the defendant. It was someone higher, someone untouchable. She glanced toward the gray-suited man, whose lips curled into the faintest smile. He knew the game was almost over. But for whom? The defense attorney pivoted, abandoning the defendant mid-battle. "Your Honor," he said, "my client has been used as a shield for others. He's willing to name names." The room froze. The prosecutor's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly. "Then, let's have them." The defendant swallowed hard, staring at Avery. "It's him," he said, nodding toward the man in the gray suit. A ripple of shock moved through the room. The man didn't flinch. He simply stood, adjusted his cufflinks, and started walking toward the exit. "Stop him," the judge ordered, but by the time security moved, the gray-suited man was already at the door. The bailiff gave chase, disappearing into the hallway. Avery gripped the stand, her breath ragged. She had waited months for this moment, but instead of closure, it felt like the beginning of something far worse. The prosecutor gathered her files with a precision that betrayed her fury. Outside, the sound of shouts echoed down the corridor, followed by silence. No one re-entered the courtroom. The judge looked at Avery, his expression unreadable. "We're adjourned, for now." Night draped over the city like a shroud. The courthouse was nearly empty, its echoes replaced by the hum of distant traffic. Avery stood in the dim corridor, waiting for her escort. She replayed every moment of the day. The gray-suited man's escape burned into her thoughts. The prosecutor approached, her voice low but urgent. "He's gone underground. We may never see him again." Avery's shoulders tightened. "Then he'll come for me," she said. The prosecutor didn't argue. Their footsteps carried down the hallway, the sound lonely and final. Somewhere outside, a single car engine idled, its low growl cutting through the silence. The next morning, the verdict was delivered without ceremony. "Not guilty," the foreman announced, his voice flat. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the gallery. Avery felt the words like a blow to the chest. The defendant exhaled, relief washing over his face, while the prosecutor's expression hardened into stone. The judge dismissed the court, his tone void of satisfaction. The trial was over, but the truth had been buried beneath the weight of influence and fear. As people filed out, Avery remained seated, her hands still gripping the armrests, staring at the empty witness stand. Outside, the courthouse steps were crowded with reporters. Flashbulbs popped, microphones thrust forward, and questions flew like arrows. Avery descended the stairs flanked by security, her gaze fixed on the pavement. A voice cut through the noise, familiar, cold. "See you soon." She looked up just in time to catch a glimpse of the gray-suited man, standing at the edge of the crowd, untouched by the chaos. Before she could react, he was gone again, swallowed by the swarm. The city felt suddenly too small, every shadow a hiding place. That night, Avery sat alone in her apartment, the city's neon glow spilling through half-closed blinds. Every creak of the building made her flinch. On the table before her lay a small, unmarked envelope. She hadn't heard anyone knock. Inside was a single Polaroid, her, walking out of the courthouse that morning. On the back, in neat handwriting, "This isn't over." Her breath caught, and the photograph slipped from her fingers. The room seemed to shrink around her, the hum of the refrigerator sounding like a ticking clock counting down. In the early hours, Avery stood at her window, watching the city breathe under the cover of darkness. Somewhere out there the man was waiting. Her reflection stared back at her, tired, wary, but unbroken. She whispered to the empty room, "I'm still here." The words were not defiance, but a promise to herself. Behind her, the phone rang once, then fell silent. She didn't turn to answer. The sound of the city swelled, and the first light of dawn broke over the skyline, soft but cold. The truth hadn't won, but neither had the lie. For now, that had to be enough.